Okay, it says that it's live.
All right, Avital, you ready to roll?
You're gonna do this, and I think you're gonna do it in Z's room so I can use the computer.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So
We're just working at it. It's not working yet.
It's not working. Can you, the questions, can you print that out or? No?
Come again, Josh?
Or I'll print them.
I'll do it.
Okay. We can see you.
Okay, cool. So you can hear me and you can see me.
Correct. I'm hanging up the phone.
Okay.
And now, can you, on the bottom of your screen, do you have something that says links? I think she might be calling you back.
Okay. I'm here. Links.
On the bottom of your screen, like.
Yeah.
Can you paste that into the chat message? There should be a YouTube link. I want to see if the YouTube link works.
One second. I have, let's see, the YouTube page.
Yeah.
What do you want me to do with it?
I just want you to paste that link into the chat box. You know, on the right side.
Okay.
Over. The chat box.
In the chat box on the bottom right.
Okay, I did. I copied and pasted it. Do you see it?
No, not yet. Did you hit enter? Hit enter.
I did.
I do not see it.
I see it here. I don't know why you can't see it. I see it, and I opened it in YouTube.
And it's playing you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, can you copy and paste that and send it to as an email as well? Are you able to send me an email with that link?
Sure. I see it, and I opened it in
And it's playing you?
Yeah.
So, can you copy and paste that and send it to as an email as well?
Okay, I sent it to you.
Good, Josh, did you get the link to the email?
To your Gmail.
To your Gmail. But I'm right there. There, I got it. I just want to see if it's recording.
There's the event page, and then there's the YouTube page with the links.
I wanted to see if that will be saved.
Which one do you want? I sent you the YouTube one, but there's also an event page.
That's great. Fantastic. Everyone needs to see that.
Okay, I sent it to you. To your Gmail.
Just close. This is like a bedroom. Not you.
There's the event page, and then there's the YouTube page with the links.
I'm going to see if that.
Which one do you want? I sent you the YouTube one, but there's also an event page.
That's great.
Taxman comment.
Hold on.
Also, Sam still got me my 2013 returns. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I think we're good. It seems to be recording. Josh, it seems to be recording.
Do we have an echo?
We don't have an echo because we're going to mute us. Okay, we're going to mute our side. And oh. So you might want to do it from here so they can see you too.
That's fine. Are we, is anyone else coming up?
Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Rabbi Fass is going to give a few words of introduction, and I don't know.
Wait 1 second. Before we do that, I just want to understand how Philip can use this and maneuver between answering questions or letting the audience talk.
So, I guess we'll type questions on the side, and he'll answer them as he can.
So let's see that happening. Just type something so I can see that.
What? Get that?
Let me see. No.
Interesting. You don't see on the right side. You don't see.
It's in Hebrew for some reason, so I think it's all. I have it on my left side, but try again.
Okay. Hold on.
Okay, I can see that. Now, how do I reply to that?
Type on the bottom of the screen, right on the bottom of that column. There's a box that says.
Got it. Okay, now I see it. Okay.
Okay.
So he can type here. Okay, did you get that?
Yes.
Okay, and then the whole group sees that?
Yeah, because it's on our big screen here. We're projecting it on the wall.
Okay, so everyone's going to be in one room, one location.
Yes. Yes.
Is it the law? Okay, so let me just.
And
Yeah. Oh.
Are we ready to go?
We're ready to go in 3 minutes.
In 3 minutes, okay.
Wait. Yay! This is how I get to see you. Wow.
I'm gonna.
We're talking to them, but I think it kind of.
Want to flip the computer to the audience so Phil can see who he's talking to, or
You can. It'll be a
he's
little bit.
looking at the other end?
Well, I'm staying here and
Okay.
it's just not going to work. I need to. It's not going to be the right angle. I can't. Because she's taking the laptop.
Let's do the same thing. Go to the kitchen.
Right.
Okay. Exit. Okay. Okay.
Now you gotta find your dad.
So they're waiting for you. So I think you should use the earphones just to get better sound.
These are the same question? No. מה זה?
כן, זה השאלה.
Sure.
תיבה דלוקה. הנה,
It's the time in there.
אוקיי.
סבבה. אז here, אנשים ישאלו שאלות,
Hey, Philip, how you doing?
ואז אתה מגיב פה.
Okay.
זהו.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
You can hear us? You can hear me?
I see you. I hear you.
Fantastic. I just want to thank Philip for taking out time today in a very busy schedule to help refresh us with some tax laws and tax news. Just Philip is a top of his profession, also top of Meshlechites. He's been there for Nefesh always, whenever we ask him, either to help Olim or to help staff, and to give us updates or to select to a studio for Nbn University. He's always responsive is absolutely, I'll do it. It's never even a consideration of if it'll work out or how it'll work out. Just Mamash Mitolev that he's been there for us all these years, and I want to thank you so much. Thank you for helping us today with this session. And without further ado, Josh.
That's it.
I see familiar faces, friendly faces, and I'm sure, I don't know if it's for you, but I've been here over 35 years. Sundays are still a challenge. So, but this is a little different format. I'm not going to do any slides. This is really an opportunity for you to ask me questions. I did get some questions before, which I'm going to respond to, and this is a dialogue, and I'll be looking at questions as they come in. But I think I want to start with sort of three, what I would say, the three lead stories for your clients, people that you're advising. Probably one of the biggest stories that you may have heard about directly, may have experienced directly, was the audits that the IRS were doing for people who were claiming the child tax credit. And that was actually received a name. It was called the Israel Project. That was the IRS's name. And I was told about 6 months ago that that project has been shut down. So all those audits and all that aggravation, and it may be bad news for people who are translators, because I think they're going to get a lot less business. But the IRS seems to have moved on. Thank God. And so people who are filing now, who are expecting this money, which is $1,000 per child for those kids who are under 17, that seems to be returned to days of old, and there may be some residual audits out there, but for the most part, people should be able to file quickly, comfortably, and expect their money in a short period of time. That I would say is probably a big story for a lot of the people you counsel and consult with. The other thing is a new story, which is going to be addressed. I already saw in some of the questions, which has to do with how the banks are interacting with customers who are U.S. citizens, the necessity to file, to sign all kinds of papers, particularly Form W-9s, and that's a result of what's called FATCA. It's legislation that it came into play, is into play, and it puts a responsibility on the bank to identify who their U.S. customers are. There's really no downside to it, but it does change how the bank views people, and to make sure that no one should feel they're doing anything wrong, but this is just going to be a part of doing business. If they're opening an account for themselves, if they're opening an account for a parent, or they're opening an account for someone who may be making aliyah, this is now just standard operating procedure. It's not like they're in any trouble, or it's something that they need to be worried about. They should just sign whatever forms the bank requires from them. If they need advice, they should ask a professional if they're unsure of how to answer, particularly accounts that maybe they just have signature authority, or they're dealing with things for elderly parents who are living here. And the last part is that last June, after we're in 215, started probably about 209, where the IRS really changed their policy in terms of Americans living outside of the country being compliant. Very often, certainly the older Olim, I've seen this quite a bit in the pre-internet days, who came and moved to Israel, they tended to drop out of the system. and even people who may just be very busy with making their klita, they forget about filing U.S. tax returns. The IRS last June came out with a very user-friendly program for people like that to get back in the system without penalty. It's called Streamline. It's a very popular path for people to take. It's created a lot of business in the accounting industry, particularly people who deal with U.S. taxes, and it's something, again, I'll address as we go through it. But I'd say those are the big three stories. One, the end of the Israel project. Two, the interaction with Americans, with the banks. And three, the way that Americans, U.S. citizens, can become compliant again. So I'm gonna go through some of these questions. Some of these I'm going to give you a very complete answer. Some I may not give you everything you want, but if it's really something very important, I can follow up later to whoever wants to know by mail. So the first question has to do with tax implications for an A1 resident. Benefit, I think back in my day, and you can correct me, this was called a temporary resident, to making aliyah versus just remaining in an A1. My experience has been, from an income tax point of view, there is really no difference. A1, if they're really living here, they're a tax resident. If they're really living here as an OLAD. The only place that this really can come into play is if someone really is splitting their time really on the gvul, on the borderline, half here, half there, and hold on, something just came up on the screen, and they might have to rely on the U.S.-Israel tax treaty to determine if they're a resident, and in one of the sub-tests as you go through the treaty deciding who is a resident, if someone is an oleh, by definition, they are a tax resident of Israel. So if someone's really on the gvul, they may want to put it off, but for the most part, if they're really living here most of the time, their tax status is the same as that of an oleh. Taxation of commuters. This is really a very interesting topic, and it's actually something I had some involvement a few months ago with your legislative department in Nefesh regarding Bituach Leumi made a change in terms of their policy regarding commuters. And some of you may be aware of this, but I'll be more specific. People who commute, let's say older commuters, people who are not entitled to the current 10-year tax exemption, they were subject to Israeli tax since 2003. So what would happen is they would go work in the States, they'd get their W-2, they would come back, sit down with an Israeli accountant, and the Israeli accountant would put the entire amount they earn if they were an employee as wages. Now, Bituach Leumi assumed, the Bituach Leumi computers assumed, that anyone who's earning wages is obviously paying Bituach Leumi, because any wage earner in Israel who's getting a 106, a 106, Bituach Leumi is withholding its source. So there was sort of a trick in a way going on, but it was done across from all the firms I saw do this, all the Israeli firms. And last summer, some smart person at Bituach Leumi figured out, wait, let's check if someone who's declaring wages is in fact paying Bituach Leumi. So they figured out that these older commuters, the commuters that have to file, in fact weren't, and they were sending pretty big bills. I know Bituach Leumi has offered that they've actually asked for a change in legislation, if Nefesh B'Nefesh could give them some tax for legislation to lessen up on these people. They are willing to do it, but under present law they went after these people, and those people are going to have to pay. What they did say to us in that meeting was that the newer Olim, the people who came after 12/31/206 or from 207 on, since they didn't have anything in their system, they were not going after those people in terms of Bituach Leumi, but technically those people are also subject to Bituach Leumi, those commuters who are earning money in the States. It's just that the Bituach Leumi has really no database to access them. That may be changing, it may not be changing. but that's the present situation. But in general, from an income tax point of view, the commuters, the rule, and Josh was very, if he's still there, he was very involved. I remember him calling me from the halls of the Knesset when this thing was passed in committee. If for any work you do outside of Israel, you're not subject to Israeli tax, nor do you have to declare the income. If you do the work here in Israel, even though it's paid from the U.S., you have to declare it all. So I like to use two extreme examples. The surgeon, the anesthesiologist who flies a couple weeks a month to the States. Obviously, all the work can be done only in the operating room, and that is all ptor from Israeli tax and Israeli reporting. The person who gets the job in the U.S. and is sitting, let's say, in their apartment in Beit Shemesh or Modin and is doing computer support for their old systems of their employer back in the States, but they're doing everything from here. They never have to get on an airplane. They are fully subject to tax. The thing that you have to be a bit careful of, that the Israeli income tax authority's position is that commuters who sort of can do some of it there and some of it here, that they will tax them on a linear basis. That's not what the law says, but what I mean is if they spend 30% of their time in the U.S. and 70% of the time in Israel, they will have to pay 70% of their income or be subject to 70% of their income to Israeli tax. Now, there are people that take positions. I've had attorneys who say, wait a second, this person goes to the States when he or she closes a deal or represents a client in court or does some other things, and actually these people deserve to have more money allocated to their time in the U.S., and that is arguable, and I've seen people get legal opinions on this. The advantage to the Olim is, again, for the amount of income that they earn in the U.S., they are exempt from reporting as well, so it certainly makes Israel's job that much harder. But that's the challenge of commuters. One of the things that I like to advise people, if the company that they're working for, very often the company doesn't want them to keep on the payroll because the company doesn't want to be exposed to Israeli tax because they have an employee on the ground in Israel. So what they'll say is, we'll now employ you as a self-employed person, and then there's really a lot you can do. That person can set up a company, they can set up an LLC, an S-Corp, and they can have much better control over how they get their income. Now, a question came from Josh. What about the person who's living in Israel working for a U.S. company and his payment to Bituach Leumi? I need some grammar help here, okay?
You can talk. Talk closer. Yeah, good.
What about when a person is living here and they're working for a U.S. company, especially in their first year, and they say, well, I'm not working, so I don't have to pay Bituach Leumi. And I say, well, that's not really true because you are working, and I always refer people to speak to an accountant to find out how they should manage their Bituach Leumi.
They should be paying Bituach Leumi on those wages. That is, excuse the term, I heard that from the horse's mouth. I sat in that meeting with the head of Bituach Leumi. Practically, what's happening for these people? They're just not on the radar, and it seems that they've been able to work. Now, the other side of the coin is the person in the Knesset at that time, or the person in the Otsar, more specifically in Mas Haknasa, an attorney by the name of Gidi Bar Zakai, who I know very well, who drafted that legislation, said it was an oversight. In other words, the intention was to include Bituach Leumi within that exemption. It just wasn't put in the legislation, and Bituach Leumi, correctly so, says, well, it's not there, so from our point of view, if we're fulfilling our mission and our job, we have to collect. So to answer your question, is they should be paying Bituach Leumi. Practically, those people, again, since they're not giving any information to Mas Haknasa, then they're also not paying Bituach Leumi.
Okay, it sounds very gray, though. It sounds like still my answer is to speak to an accountant. That I
You
don't
have
want
to,
to take
yeah,
this liability
you have to
for
speak
that
to the account.
answer.
There's no, in other words, again, I threw that in about the history behind the legislation because the intent was to exempt these people on income that they earned outside, but that is not what the law says. And in fact, you might want to find out where things are progressing in terms of the Bituch Leumi had actually looked to Nefesh to write some legislation or draft the language so that they could try to put it in the Knesset. Obviously, everything in the Knesset is on hold in the moment, but it was to help people in this position and clarify that. Okay?
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Just to pick up on that question, could you just explain options for self-employed? Self-employed in terms of atzmaim who have to pay both Bituach Leumi and Social Security tax,
Okay.
and
So
what the
that's
options are if they don't want to do a company.
okay. So that's a great question. Um, I like, there's people who are self-employed and they're getting money. If they're getting paid from the U.S., at least to mitigate their exposure to Bituach Leumi here, if they get paid into an LLC or some other type of corporate entity like an S corp, then they can say to Bituach Leumi they're getting dividend income out of that entity, which is not subject to Bituach Leumi. But the bigger question are just in general, what about Olim who are self-employed and want to avoid double taxation of Social Security and Bituach Leumi? Now, I'm sure you're all aware of, there was a large organization for many years that acted as sort of an outsourcing. In other words, you had a customer, and instead of you billing the customer, it was called the Yul Sachir. They would bill, and then you would get a paycheck. So you would avoid any exposure to U.S. self-employment tax. They lost a big case with Bituach Leumi. I heard a rumor that they're shutting down, or they shut down. You may know better than I. I hadn't been sending people there for many, many years.
They'll have business.
What?
They're appealing.
Okay. I do know that some of the smaller providers of this service were not challenged, were not audited, were not part of the court case, and I have clients who are still using these smaller providers, and I think there's even I'm not sure if you provide the list of them or not, but they still do exist. I don't know if they're taking on new customers or not. I don't know what their own exposure. The problem with those arrangements are they're really only good for service businesses, and they're really only good for service businesses that don't have a lot of expenses themselves, because they didn't necessarily take all receipts. Certainly they didn't like to reimburse for travel. But other than that, the only other alternative is to set up your own company, which probably the cheapest that I've come across that I see from Israeli accountants is about 10 to 12,000 shekel a year for the payroll, for the bookkeeping, and for the audit. Now, I always like to tell people, well, how do you really, let's say that 10,000 shekel or 12,000 shekel is $3,000. The $3,000 is deductible, which means that your real cost of $3,000 is only about $2,400 of it, and then you have to compare that $2,400 to how much they would be paying in self-employment tax. So someone who has an arrangement where they can earn after expense the equivalent of $50,000, maybe 200,000 shekel, they'll have to pay self-employment tax of $7,500 from after-tax income, as opposed to $2,400 just to have that company in that example I gave. So it's usually, if they have a small business and they're only going to make $10,000 to $20,000, they'll just have to bite the bullet and pay both. I think once you start getting above 20, 30, into the 40, it's pretty much of a no-brainer that it still pays to have your own company. Okay, gifting. What does receiving money from the U.S. impact on Israeli taxes? Absolutely nothing. Gifts are not taxable to the recipient, not in the U.S. and not in Israel. My only advice is to people, when they get significant gifts, they should make a copy of the check or the bank transfer. If there's a letter from a relative, this can also apply to inheritances, because if someday they have to do, let's say, a Hatzarat Hon, a declaration of assets to Israel, or they're already self-employed, and they'll be questioned maybe, why did this money come into your account? And you can just prove that it's a gift. There's no reporting requirements on receiving a gift, but it is something, if it's certainly for a big ticket item, at least a car, or certainly for housing an apartment, buying an apartment, then you just should keep very good records and keep those records forever. Non-mandatory filing in Israel. Not sure what that's how it was presented to me. People, the new olim don't have to file. If the new olim come here and work as schirim, generally, if their salary is less than, I forget the latest number, it's somewhere around 500,000-600,000 shekel, they don't have to file. If they're self-employed, of course, they'll have to open a teak, but I'm not sure what that's exactly referring to. U.S. citizens being flagged by IRS and having IRS refunds. Okay, so like I said, that is winding down. There is still some refunds being held up, but we are seeing that those are being freed up, and I think this is just sort of backlog of people that got picked up under the child tax credit. I think all of you know the background there. There was if you have a child, if you're a U.S. citizen and your child is a U.S. citizen and you work, you're entitled to up to $1,000 per child. Anyone who has not reached 17, and there was a lot of abuse of these rules. People were submitting false tax returns, claiming wages, because you had to show earned income in order to get this $1,000, and the IRS really went on the offensive. They really got very aggressive, way beyond, in fact, even what the law said, asking for proof. My favorite, it's not a favorite, I hate these stories, but was that someone once had to ask for proof of the child's report card in Gan, that they were attending Gan. And we had to explain that there are no report cards in Gan. But that's going. In other words, people should be getting those refunds, and if they're still there, they should either turn to a professional or write to the IRS. Social Security and Aliyah. Social Security, there's really an upside. There's no downside. You don't lose benefits, and in fact, benefits for seniors who are receiving Social Security under the treaty, and which both the U.S. and Israel respect, that it's no longer taxable in either jurisdiction. Social Security can be taxable for people who have above a certain income, but once you move to Israel, it is not taxable. I'd say the only downside with Social Security is, one, you can't use it here. In other words, you can't go into a doctor here and give your Social Security number and get covered by Medicare. And I'd say the other downside is that if someone really is here, joins Kupat Cholim, then and they're really not going back to the States, or they reach an age where they're just not able to travel back to the States for medical care, then they really should look at supplementary payments that they pay through in Medicare, which is called B and C, which allows you to get coverage by doctors and laboratories, etc. And it may pay to stop paying those sums, because you can't use the Medicare here for collecting, and they can save themselves maybe quite a bit of money every month. U.S. citizens renounce. Yes.
Sorry, I have a question on that.
Sure.
What about people who get early Social Security and want to work in Israel? In other words, people, I think that 62, you're maxed out on that, right?
Yes. Okay, that's a great question, Rachel. The U.S. has a system that you can collect as early as 62, but if you collect between 62 and 67, it gets adjusted every so often. Your Social Security is reduced by a certain factor of how much you work. I think between 62 and 65, for every $3 over a certain sum, about $12,000, you lose $1 of Social Security, and after from 65 on, it's $2. For every $2 over that amount, you lose $1. But the IRS or Social Security Administration realized that they didn't want to get into trying to figure out what is an average wage or what is a good wage that someone could be earning and should be reducing their salary. They, someone in Paris versus someone in Ghana versus someone in Beijing. So they just came out with a different rule for U.S. citizens that live outside of the U.S. states, and it's a bit draconian. And they basically say that anyone, we don't care what you earn if you live outside of the U.S., unless you're self-employed. Self-employed, those other rules still apply. But if you have a job, and it's a part-time job, if you work more than 45 hours a month, doesn't matter what you earn, you are ineligible to get any Social Security benefits. There's no sliding scale. It's either 45, less than 45, or 45 and more, you don't get anything. So someone who wants to keep working, would like a little part-time job, it's going to be very part-time because they really can't work more than 10 hours a week, a few hours a day. If they want to keep their Social Security, they may say, you know what, it still pays for me. I actually want to work. I'll delay my Social Security till I'm 67, then I can do whatever I want. And as they say, have my cake and eat it too. I can work, I can earn, and I won't have any reduction. But in that period between 62 and 67, you have to either work out an arrangement with this employer where you only work very part-time. Over the years, I had argued, actually, I haven't had one of these in many years, but academics who, let's say, were already tenured, and they're teaching, they no longer had any other responsibilities than teaching. That's what they were being paid for, and it worked out, actually, they were only maybe teaching 6-8 hours a week, but still getting a full salary, let's say, at Hebrew U or Tel Aviv or Bar Ilan. But most, once you get out of the academic world, you don't have arrangements like that. U.S. citizens renouncing U.S. citizenship for tax benefits, new phenomenon. This is a big deal. It is something that we are dealing with. I would say, if I've been in business for 35 years, for the first 30, I never had anyone come in and speak to me about it, or if I did, I could count them on one hand. In the last 2 to 3 years, in particular the last year, there are a lot of people considering doing this. And it's really, it is a new phenomena, and I think people are just upset by the amount of compliance that they have to do to be a U.S. citizen, the forms for the bank accounts, the F-bars, the threats of such serious penalties. Sometimes for U.S. citizens there's problems just having money, securities, an account here in Israel. They don't want U.S. citizens, and they don't want to be subject to inheritance laws or estate tax on assets they have, or they may have income that in Israel, let's say in real estate, even though this is changing, Israel made its own reforms and this is phasing out, but up until now people could make a lot of money in Israel buying and selling apartments and wouldn't have to pay any Israeli tax, but they'd have to pay U.S. tax. So some people are saying, I've been here for many years, I have nothing to do with the U.S., or my kids are U.S. citizens and they really don't have anything. They don't want to start filing returns and F-bars and deal with the banks. So they are expatriating. I can't say it's a huge movement, but it has certainly picked up. And probably the biggest question that people, or the hesitancy that people have, is their access to the U.S. We have found that there's sort of two categories of people. Those people who have U.S. passports and another passport. We have people who have a European, an EU passport, or Canadian. Well, them it's a no-brainer. They can just go to the States freely without any visa requirements for visit. They obviously can't work there. The other people are people that's after they give up the U.S. citizen, all they would have is their Israeli passport. Israel's still one of the countries that you need a visa to get to the U.S., but the cases we've had is those people have automatically, when they on the same sort of, they go one desk to give up their U.S. passport and another desk to get a 10-year multi-entry visa as a tourist. I've yet to have someone who has expatriated and then asked for a visa, a working visa. And you have to be careful sometimes with younger people. You know, do they want to give up that? And of course, it's an emotional thing, and it's not that easy. I find the people that it's easier for them to do are, let's say, what I call the accidental Americans, people whose parents, let's say, came on Aliyah many years ago. They were born here, but to two U.S. parents, they're U.S. citizen, or those people whose parents are actually Israeli, who went on a sabbatical or for a few years to the States. They were born there. They got U.S. citizenship by virtue of the fact they were born, and then they came back to Israel. Now they're 45 years old and running a high-tech company and have nothing to do with the U.S. in terms of obligations of citizenship. But it is growing, and sometimes it's even called for in terms of overall family planning, tax and financial planning. If someone decides to make Yeridah and does not own any property in Israel, what tax obligations might they have? From my experience, none. Israel does have an exit tax. It's kind of hard to enforce. It only tends to come up on people who were in high tech and had, let's say, shares in a startup that now has gone public or has been bought by Apple or Google or something like that. But if someone makes Yeridah, doesn't have any property in Israel, well, certainly if they make Yeridah within the first 10 years, they have zero obligation. If after 10 years, and they do have other property, they are technically subject to an exit tax, and they should consult an accountant before they leave to see how they can settle this up. Although it's very, very difficult for the Israeli tax authorities to enforce this rule. Are they required to file taxes or declare income earned in the U.S. after the 10-year benefit has passed? Yes. We are, of course, we haven't gotten there yet in terms of the people, the earliest people who came on January 1st, 2007, they still have a few good years ahead of them before they have to file, but we do have a lot of people who came on Aliyah of the previous law, which was a 5-year exemption, and those people, let's say, who came in 206 or 205, well, they've been having to file tax returns for a couple of years. So after the 10 years is up, they will have to file Israeli income tax returns if they maintain any type of income outside of Israel. If all of their income has shifted to Israel and all their investments have shifted to Israel, they may still not have to file anything. But if they want to keep some money out of Israel, or they have rental property, or they're working, they're still commuting, then they're gonna have to become Israeli, not only taxpayers but Israeli tax flyers from the date once the 10-year or 120 months from their Aliyah expires. Advice for having an Osek Patur or Moshe and dealing with American taxes. You know, people come to me, Osek Patur, that's a definition having to do with people having to collect or not collect VAT. It's a really nice way for people to start a business. They don't have to deal with the value-added tax authorities. And then they usually only have to do a filing at the end of the year for Mas Haknasa and Bituach Leumi. You know, it's something that you need someone either to go to the VAT authorities or to go to an Israeli accountant who gets you that Osek Ptor that you don't expect. I think it's somewhere around 80,000 shekel of gross revenue, and then you just attach that to a plain receipt that you can buy at any stationery store. And if it changes, then that person will have to, you know, pay VAT. But that Osek Ptur or Osek Morshe, which is what you call in the U.S. is self-employed, they are still self-employed in the eyes of the U.S. They are not Patur in U.S. tax, so they should keep track of their expenses, and they should put that information into what's called Schedule C on their 1040s, their U.S. income tax returns. Are there any tax benefits for Olim on items imported for a business? Mas הכנסה. I'm really not familiar with these rules, only to say that if you can produce a receipt, and let's say very often it may be exempt from meches, from import duties, you generally do have to pay VAT. That is an expense that that person can take on their. They can get the VAT back, and they can take it as an expense in their business. Just because they don't get a cheshbonit mas does not mean they cannot deduct it for VAT and for mas הכנסה and bituch leumi. The last question that I have on my sheet is, why do banks now require a social security number in order to open an account? That is because of the FATCA legislation. The FATCA requires foreign banks. It's not just Israel. It's any other bank in the world to identify their U.S. citizens. Last year, Israel entered into what's called an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement, where they said the banks are not going to report directly to the IRS. In other words, the Bank Hapolim, Bank Leumi is not going to produce a 1099, which they're going to send to the IRS just like Citibank or Bank of America would do, or Merrill Lynch, but they are going to send that data to the Otsar, which they're already doing as is in terms of income from that account, and then the exchange of information will be between the Treasury, the Otsar, and the IRS. How this is actually going to work, the fall, I think they haven't figured it out yet. But at least Israel did sign on. The banks were relieved of a very big burden in terms of communicating with the IRS, but their minimum requirement is to, first on any new account, but they are also seeking out Vatikim. They're looking through their files. They're looking to see on where, it says on everyone's Tudat Zahut, where they were born, what country they were born. I have a lot of clients getting calls and saying, we see from our files that you were born in the U.S., please come in and file a W-9. But there's no harm in it. You shouldn't be worried about it. In fact, the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, is to avoid signing these forms, because then the banks will start taking steps to even go as far as freezing the accounts. Then you say, well, I just want to get the money out of that bank, and they won't even release it until you sign that form. So if it comes up with one of your clients, they shouldn't panic. They should just go in there, sign the return, put the Social Security number on it. Sometimes in what I call mixed marriages, where there's a U.S. citizen married to a non-U.S. citizen, they might want to sit down and think about how they want to separate their assets, and perhaps certain assets with income that the U.S. would tax should go in the non-U.S. citizen spouse's account, and the U.S. citizen should maybe only be on the over checking account. Again, this is very personal, and everyone has to make their own determination. But from a tax point of view, that sometimes is something worth doing, and it's perfectly legal. So that's really the end of my questions on the sheet that I got from Nefesh. Anybody is free to step up or type something.
Phil, could you just say a word about the Shnat Histaglut concept, and if it's relevant to the Olim?
Okay, the Shnat Histaglut, as many of you know, that was part of the 10-year the legislation that was in 208, which came into effect for 207, and it said that if an Olek comes during the first 90 days, they can fill out this, probably the simplest form that I've ever seen. It basically has I think it's their name, address, Tudat Zahut, and they sign it, and date of Aliyah, and they send it by fax to Misrad HaKlita. So what that basically says is, for the first 12 months to the income tax authorities, I'm sort of here physically, but don't consider me as a tax resident during that period of time. It doesn't add to your 10-year exemption period. In other words, if you get through the Shnat Histaglut, you'll only have 9 years left. And here's the situation where I recommend people to use it, and it works best. Let's say you get your Olim flight. Someone comes in the summer of 2015. Let's say they come sometime after June 30th, and they have one of these arrangements where they can keep working for their U.S. employer. So the U.S. employer says, I want to keep you. I want you to be part of the company. What do you need for us to do? If that person in that first 90 days sends in Shnat Histaglut, excuse me, for 2015, they can stay on the payroll. From an Israeli tax point of view, it's if they're not here, and Israel cannot tax them. There's a provision in the treaty which prevents Israel from taxing them. So for that first calendar year, in that example, for the balance of 2015, they don't have to change anything. They don't have to run out and set up a company. They don't have to set up an LLC or anything. They can just stay on their employer's payroll. The following year, 2016, although half of it will be still Shnat Histaglut, that's the year they have to make some change, because once they're here more than 183 days, the treaty doesn't protect them. So in my opinion, the Shnat Histaglut is perfect for someone still on a U.S. payroll, isn't going to spend 183 days in 2015 or future years, and it sort of gives them some time to get acclimated, and then they only have to deal with accountants or tax planning starting January 1st the following year. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Phil, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Good to see you. I also want to mention one other thing again, and it's for me it's a little disturbing because I heard about it now from a couple sources that there's some office who is telling people people come in and they haven't been compliant that they will be arrested when they get to the U.S. This is true urban legend, and anyone who calls you up with that panic call, I want to visit my mother, I don't want to spend my 2 weeks in jail, that's just false. So they're like I said, there is a program to get them caught up, but there's no one waiting there with handcuffs at Kennedy or Newark or wherever. Okay?
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much.
And you know how to email me, and I'm very happy to have this special relationship with Nefesh B'Nefesh. I did a seminar, not a webinar, a filming the other day, a few weeks ago with Kim. So it's a sort of an introduction to financial and tax issues for new Olim. So it's going to be part of your Nefesh B'Nefesh University. I'm happy to get feedback on that once it goes up.
We're making you a movie star.
You're ready in. You're ready in. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks a million, Phil.
That was the most wonderful work.
What's his name?
Philip CPA at Gmail. What one?
Yeah.